Good afternoon and welcome to the Smart Connection Consultancy's webinar number 4, Maintenance to Extend the Life of a Field. And what I'm going to do is just go through a presentation over the next 15-20 minutes on the key issues that are facing people with long turf maintenance fields or 3G fields. And then I'm just going to share that with you. This is part of a session of 4 webinars that we've done, and this is what I present today to the people who joined in with us. So let's begin. So firstly, what we're going to talk about, the importance of maintenance for this very important aspect. This aspect is how maintenance can extend the life of the field. The idea of synthetic fields that have no maintenance used to be a selling point a decade ago. Well, very soon the realization was that it's an engineered surface that needs to be continually maintained to allow it to perform to the level that it was expected. And if you're spending $1.5 to $2 million on a synthetic football or rugby field, you need to make sure it can last its life. So what we're going to do is talk about the importance of maintenance to the life of the field, the typical maintenance challenges that people have, the type of maintenance and the roles and responsibilities, and then just touch on some of the machinery that are used and ones that shouldn't be used, and then a 5-step plan to get maintenance right. So Smart Connection Consultancy is a leisure consultancy that for the last 10 years has been specialising in providing advice and advocacy for more sports grounds for people, and especially for children within local government, to get them more active. We've specialised in the use of synthetic sports turf technology to be able to do that. And this is the 4th of a group of 4 webinars that we're doing to share our knowledge with the industry. We also have a LinkedIn discussion group at the address below, and we have written a number of smart guides, 5 volumes, each between 20 and 50 pages, to give you the ideas and the background on synthetics and how they can be used. So the importance of maintenance for the life expectancy. It's really maintenance there to achieve its life expectancy, and also for the performance, ensuring they can maintain the playing fields are certified, because there are a number of sports where if it's not certified you can't train or play on it, and that includes AFL football and Cricket Australia, and also for rugby union, and that really is for training as well as for competition. Also, maintenance provides safety. If it's achieved, if the risk management is mitigated. As we can see on the right hand side here, we have a field where the maintenance hasn't been up to the appropriate standard. So we can see a number of things from this picture. It's a corner flag, or close to the corner of a football field, football as in soccer. And what we have here is fibulated yarn, and it's fibulated as fields get older. But if it is filled properly, only the fibrillation only happens at the tips. So the 15 to 20 odd mil around the tip, it doesn't work, it doesn't fibrillate for the whole 50 or 60 mil. But this field has done, because it hasn't got enough infill. We also see how flat it is, and again that's because it hasn't got the right amount of performance infill or sand as ballast in it, and therefore it's fallen over. And then the hole where the upright where the flag goes hasn't been capped or filled, so that becomes dangerous. So all in all, lots of examples within this one photo of where it's not been maintained, it's causing a performance problem, a safety issue, and it's reducing the life of the field. Also, lack of maintenance has an impact on the environment, and we'll explore that in a lot more detail later on. If the field isn't being maintained, it has an impact on the warranty requirements by the manufacturers, and it could void a warranty, which means if something does go wrong and it's not being maintained, then the warranty will not be applicable to that field. Good maintained fields look good, and people want to play on them because of that. And an example of the aesthetic side and the environmental side is that a relatively new field in New South Wales, where the infill has gone over onto the natural grass, and the natural grass isn't growing because of the amount of infill on it. So we need to make sure that it's mitigated and the infill is kept on the field of play and not into the environment, because that's where the microplastics have a challenge. This is another example recently from within Victoria. The organisation who owns the field rang up the maintenance company and said, there's a problem with the system, there's something happened, it's your fault, can you come and fix it? So they came and had a look, and they soon found this guy doing weight training, so bringing up a clean snatch and then dropping the weight onto the foam, but it was actually going through the foam underlay, so the shot pad, and then going and smashing the infill, the drainage cell, and breaking the drainage cell. So you've got to make sure that the field is being used for what it was intended to be used for, and not for other activities like this. So the impact on limited maintenance is on playability and performance. Also, if you're not investing in maintenance, the cost of remediation and bringing them back to a level which is acceptable, either for recertification or for use, increases and grows accordingly. It reduces the life expectancy, has an impact on safety concerns, and the dilapidation of the product. It also can void the warranty and has an impact on recertification against the sports performance standards. So there are reasons, both positive and concerning, of why you have to have really good maintenance. So typical maintenance challenges include flattening of the yarn, and we see that here on the photo on a relatively new field, because there isn't enough infill within the yarn, it's fallen over. Now what happens there is the studs of the boots are actually on the top of the yarn, which actually breaks the yarn down, as opposed to the top of the yarn should actually be on the underneath of the boot, and the studs should actually be on the infill, the performance infill on the side. So that will cause a problem. What we have next is the seams. So this photo again shows shows a flattening of the yarn, there isn't enough infill in it, and what we're seeing here down, straight up and down the photo, is actually the seams starting to come apart. So FIFA have failure of the field if the seams are more than 3 millimeters apart. So already we're seeing that these are starting to run apart, and that needs to be identified early. You need to then move the infill out to see what the cause is, and it might be having to re-glue the seams to make sure it doesn't go apart, because if you don't get this early on, you'll have seams like this which are 25 mil apart, and that then becomes a tripping hazard. So you really do need to get in early and make sure it works. This is an area of an older field around the goalposts. So you've got compaction around, and the field really needs to be tickled, is what I call it. It needs to have the tines run through it to stimulate the infill and get it all up to an appropriate level. This will reduce the compaction around high wear areas. And this is another high wear area. So the gates coming in, so you come straight off the concrete onto the turf, and normally these gates are about 1 meter apart. So we're looking now to see whether we can get a few more gates to halve the number of boots that come into one square meter of turf. You should have maintenance on here so that it reduces the compaction. So you're looking at more than just a brush going across it to get rid of the top. You've got to get deep down on that compaction, otherwise it won't work. And these are intense usage areas around the field of play. Another intense usage area is the penalty spot. So if somebody has kicked this out and kicked it out down to the carpet base and then down onto the road base underneath it. Whereas if after a drill session like this, or after a game, or number of games of the weekend, a local club just had a bucket of infill and just threw it on, you wouldn't have this problem. It wouldn't be so hard. So you've really got to make sure you look at this. The next area is infill levels. So what we have here is a very wobbly line. So it's a field in Victoria. It's a 42, 43 mil yarn field. And the yarn and the sand isn't holding the lines in place. So that's one of the reasons why we now say you should really be looking at 50 mil as a minimum length, because it gives you more ballast and more infill. And what's happened here, according to the maintenance company, is that maybe the small tractor that's gone around towing the brush has just done the circles a bit too quickly, and over time it's moved the field, and so that causes a line like that, and obviously it wouldn't pass because of the straight line for the FIFA test. So it's about having the tow on the small Toro tractor or something like that to go at a slower pace and make sure that there's infill, and the circles are wide circles as you go round and you turn, and they're not rushed, because it's basically pulling the lines out of shape. Also on the typical field, you're going to get areas that aren't brushed, don't get the sunlight, and you'll get weeds and algae and moss growing. So these need to be cleaned and treated probably once a season to make sure that that's not in. So you've got to really build this level of training in, so it's not just the brushing around. This is an example on a field, again in Victoria, where you've got rubbish on the field. You can also see the seam is now starting to pull apart, so that needs to be addressed. And what you've got outside is a lorry with the parks contractor. Now, while I was there, which was about 2 or 3 hours doing one of the health checks, he actually cleaned all around the fields in the park, but didn't come into the synthetic field. So the synthetic field is maintained on a fortnightly basis or a monthly basis by a contractor, but it's a different contractor from the parks people. So you need to look at the maintenance needs for a field, not only for the grass, but for the bins, for the rubbish, for the cleansing of the maintenance of the light, the maintenance of the fence. So it's not just down to one particular area, because if it was, this would have been seen. So this is where the posts, the base posts on the fence behind the goals, have obviously dropped off and haven't been maintained. So the club should have said it, the maintenance people from council should have picked her up, and also the contractor who does the cleaning should have picked her up and put her on reserve, because this is a safety, a not health and safety issue. Because if people are skidding on the grass and going to there, that could cause significant damage to an individual's legs. The next area is where we've had some vandalism, and it's just been topped up with a bit of grass. Now that's not too bad on an old field, but on a new field you really don't want to let that get away. So that should be addressed very quickly, an area cut out and then refilled with new grass, or newer grass that hasn't been used so much from outside the main field, maybe on the 5-meter runoffs to make that work. The next area is on safety. So this is a trip hazard. So it's where the long pile grass, like the football field, and also a cricket wicket, which has got a grass covering. But you can see the width of the gaps here. They're about 20 to 30 mil. So that's a serious occupational health and safety issue and a trip issue. And it shouldn't be like that. The least should happen is you should have infill all the way along there. So if somebody is running on it, you don't twist and turn your ankle. This really is dangerous, and this is on a relatively new field. The field was only 2 or 3 years old, but again, the maintenance of it and the monitoring of the maintenance needs to pick these areas up. So what kind of maintenance are we looking at? Well, there's all different kinds of maintenance. There's the daily inspections that maybe the club would use before the games, make sure it's safe as you would on the natural turf fields. The litter removal, the post-training game top-ups around the penalty areas where you've got a bucket of infill and you put it down. The brushing, so you've got a tow behind on a small tractor and you're brushing all of the areas, collecting the leaves, getting rid of the area on the top, so you've got a really nice, well-brushed field. You should have a deep clean, a compaction, the top 2 or 3 inches or 5 centimeters, really brushing that, getting it a little bit deeper to make sure that it's not compacted. Treating the weeds, the moss, the algae, the decompaction about the gates as you come in, around the goal areas. And most importantly, the monitoring and reviewing. Now, how often you do all of those will be dependent on the type of usage the field gets. If it's 20 hours, 20 to 40, over 40, over 60 hours, that will determine how often you do the different kinds of maintenance. And the guidance we give is about 1 hour of maintenance for every 10 hours of usage. So for instance, after a Saturday where you may have it being used from 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, that's about 10 hours. So you should have somebody to go and top up the penalty spots that we talked about before. And that would take half an hour to an hour of maintenance, just to make sure it's all okay. It's not just about bringing another contractor in, it's about having that role identified and who's responsible for it. So the roles and the responsibilities are critical for the overall maintenance. So the daily, weekly, annual inspection should really be the client, the club, etc. Litter removal before the games, after the games by the club, the people who are using it. Using the client or the parks contractor to keep the bins tidy, pick up the old bottles off, because if you do that, the people who are using the field will take more responsibility and own the field better and won't leave the dirty rubbish around. Refill high wear areas like the penalty spots by the club, the client keep an eye on, or the parks contractor. The brushing and cleaning can be done by the client or indeed the parks contractor, just putting on the small brush on the back. The technical clean should be done on a regular basis by the specialist company, because they normally have something like a small tractor which can actually hoover it up, clean the dust out from it, and it's called a sports champ or an equivalent. And then the council should have independent monitoring at least once a year to make sure everything's on track and pick up and identify any remediation that's going to be needed. And we provide this as an example with the inspection and the maintenance reports that we put out as part of every specification. So it details the maintenance and carried out, what the condition was when the contractors come in and found the field. And then what's actually happened, what are the findings, what are the rectifications and the impacts. So that should be done by the contractor every single time that about once a month when they come in. And this is the type of machinery that we see being used. So the two examples on the left-hand side are drag mats. The first one on the top is a metal drag mat that I've seen being used, and a heavy rubber one underneath that. We shouldn't be seeing either of these drag mats being used on synthetic turf because it breaks down the tips of the fibre and would reduce the life expectancy of the field by 2 or 3 years. Really shouldn't be using this. Now, a number of companies use them who haven't got the full range of materials to use or of equipment to use, and that's why they're cheaper. So I've seen some companies saying that we'll come and do a field for $600 and that will maintain it. It is a short-term benefit to the council economically, but really it's a medium-term problem because you're going to have to replace it quickly. So it could cost you an extra $100,000, $150,000 because you're having to bring forward the replacement to the field. On the right is an example of a softer drag mat, if you like, that's being used to collect all the rubbish and mainly around the leaves, and then you take it to a spot and put her in a bin. If you don't get that right, this is what can happen. This is an older field which has been used, the drag masses using a brush now, but you can see how much figulation has happened by then. So you should use a brush which is firm but softer than the drag mats, and this will collect everything that you have up and down the fields, and then you can use that in a safe way. It extends the life of the field and it doesn't break it down. So on the left hand side we've got a drag brush which also has some tines in it, so you can put those down and tickle the top so you don't get the compaction. And on the right you've got the friction sweeper mat, which is very similar to what I showed you before, with the mat on the top so that it keeps all the leaves together. Well worth having a look at. So just to finish off a few slides, the 5-step plan. Agree what needs to be maintained. Is it the grass, the penalty spots, the entrance points, coaches' boxes, which are heavily used, the fences, the goals, cages, cricket wickets, lights, the bins. It's a different kind of maintenance for each of those, so don't just assume that if you put out a maintenance that will be done by the contractor. We've got to specify what needs to be done, and that should be specific for each field. If you had a sports and leisure centre, you wouldn't say that the cleaning of the floors is maintenance for everything. You would define what maintenance you need for the plant, for the lights, for the air conditioning. It's the same for a sports field. You do the same. You got to then work out who maintains it. Is it the users, the sports club, the clubs, a service provider, your parks people, or a specialist? And link the frequency of it to the amount of usage that it's actually being done. And that way you'll get the right machinery and the right resources in to do the work you need to do. The second step is make sure it's monitored and reported. So weekly check the maintenance and the usage. Make sure that that ratio of 1 to 10 is being done. Check that it is having a weekly clean in the brush and the deeper clean on the monthly, and checking the seams at the same time. And that will make sure that the quarterly deep clean and decompaction of the highway areas from day one really makes the difference. The seasonal aspects. Work out if you're busier in the summer or busier in the winter, depending on the sport, and you may need more condensed maintenance during those times. And an annual assessment will allow you to identify the top-ups that's needed and make sure that that annual assessment review the current life expectancy and what remediation is needed to get to the maximum. Make sure you invest in the right resources in the right area. Make sure you have a budget for the maintenance, remediation, and the inspections. Train the users, if that's a sports club who takes the responsibility. And the regularity of the maintenance meets the facility needs. So for instance, this picture is a 12-year-old field where you can see the amount of infill is in the spoon drains around the edge. Now we don't use spoon drains anymore because these can get washed out into storm water, and the infill then goes into the sewerage or stormwater drains rather. So we're trying to make sure that that doesn't happen. So the drains we use now are underneath the field, as opposed to 12 years ago. This was quite common. So make sure you have the top up for the infill and the inspections. Yes, again, I'm saying the inspections and the assessments and reports are ongoing. And this is one of the best fields around. It's 6 years old, Blackman Park at Lane Cove, and it feels as though it's got another 6-7 years to go. But it's because it's maintained every fortnight and the infill is remaining at the top level. So identify the tonnage that's needed with your service provider, and it'll probably be 2 or 3 tons per field every 2 or 3 years. We're hoping that the new designs now keeps the infill on the fields and it's not lost. You don't want to lose 2 or 3 tons of rubber infill every 2-3 years. The fourth area is about the infill. It's about $750 per ton, and assuming 2 or 3 tons done annually after year 2. We're now looking at the yarn and doing the dual yarns to contain it so that you don't have as much movement, and also having an upstand around the fence so you don't lose it out into the wider grass. But the remediation is driven by the annual assessment. And then link the maintenance to the procurement of the field. Link the maintenance for the first 2 or 3 years, because it's cheaper for you to get it as part of the procurement than what it will be afterwards. And that way, you'll actually get the life of your expectancy, of your field to be 10 years. So if you have any questions around this, or any of the other areas around synthetic fields, please drop me a line to martin@smartconnection.net.au, and I'll work with you to see how you can maximize the life expectancy of your synthetic field. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope that this, together with the other 4, have been useful for you understanding more about synthetic fields. Thank you.